The power rule is the most fundamental derivative rule, and it's used in every derivative rule. So you need to memorize this like it's your times tables. First, let's say I have a function like f of x is equal to 4x cubed. To take the derivative, or in other words, to find f prime of x, what do? We use the power rule because 4x cubed is a polynomial. So in order to do that, the first step is to multiply this power with its coefficient. So we get 4 times 3. The x stays the same, and then the next thing we do is take this 3 and decrease it by 1. So 3 minus 1. The final result would be something like 12x squared. Pretty simple. So let's say we have another function, something like y is equal to 4x to the negative 3. Just because there's a negative there, it doesn't really matter. To take the derivative of y, or y prime, we do the same steps. So first, we take this and multiply it with 4. So 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. We keep the x, and then we take this negative 3 and drop it by 1. So negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4. So this is your final answer. Let's say you have a function something like this. F of x is equal to 3x to the 0. Well, by the power rule, it'd be pretty simple. You take the 0, multiply it with the 3, and you get 0. What is x to the 0? X to the 0 is really just 1. So we can think about this as 3 to the 1. Or basically, just a constant. So here's a big rule. It's much faster to just memorize this. Constants go to 0 when you take the derivative. Constants go to 0. The most common trick is when you have an x in the denominator, and it's actually just a polynomial. So for example, let's say you have something like f of x is equal to 1 over x squared. You might think, oh my goodness, it's a fraction, what do I do? But really, this is the same as x to the negative 2. And then we can just do the power rule. Negative 2 times 1, because there's an invisible 1 here. So we get negative 2, x, and then negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. So our final answer, f prime of x, is equal to negative 2x minus 3. The second most common type of trick is when you have roots. For example, let's say we have y is equal to square root of x. We know from exponent rules that x to the square root of x is just the same as x to the half. And so we can just use our power rule and multiply half by an invisible 1 again. And so we get half. Keep the x, and then we take half and drop it by 1. So half minus 1 is negative 1 half. Now often we can write the answer like this, y prime is equal to half x to the negative half. But sometimes you might want to rewrite into something like y prime equals 1 over 2 root x after applying all of the exponent rules. Alright, so what do you do if you have more than one polynomial term? So for example, let's say you have something like f of x is equal to 3x squared plus 2x plus 1. Well, in this case, we just take the power rule for each one individually. So let's do it. F prime of x, we're taking the derivative. Power rule on the first one, so we take 2 times 3, we get 6, x, and then drop the 2 by 1, drop this 2, it becomes a 1. Then we take this power, which is a 1, multiply it with a 2, and then we get 2, keep the x, and then x to the 1 minus 1, which is 0. And then lastly, we get this, it's a constant, and remember, constants go to 0, so we get plus 0. So our final answer would just be the power rule of each term individually, which would be 6x plus 2. That's it. So here's a problem you can try on your own. Pause the video now if you want to try. And if you're not pausing, here we go. So the derivative of f of x, f prime of x, is equal to, first term, 2 times 3, 6, x, and then we drop the 2 by 1, so we get 1. The next term, we get 1 times half, so it's still half. Keep the x, and then we drop the 1 by 1, so we get 0. Then we get a constant. A constant is 0, so we keep that 0. Next, we want to simplify this before we move on. So let's just start by simplifying it. What can we write this as? This is the same as 2x to the half. So let's do the power rule on this instead. So we take the power rule of half times 2, so that's just 1, x, and then half minus 1, which is negative half. And lastly, this one's also ugly. We want to rewrite this. So let's rewrite this here. So we have 4x to the 4. And though we can do power rule on this. So 4 times 4 is 16. So we have 16x. So we drop this 4 by 1, and then we get 3. So our final answer is f prime of x is equal to 6x plus half, because this x0 goes to 1, plus 0, which we don't write, plus x to the negative half. We can write it as x to the negative half, or we can write it as 1 over root x. They're the same thing. Plus 16x cubed.